Now take your eyes away from the burning villages of Donbas and the shattered streets of Kakhovka. Shift your focus south. Because while headlines were fixed elsewhere, the truly decisive moments in this war were unfolding quietly across the wide steppes of Zaporizhzhia. In just a matter of days, the Russian army carried out what has become its largest retreat operation on the southern front. Military records are already describing it as Ukraine's most significant territorial gain in such a short span since June 2023. The timing could not have been more precise. After months of sustained pressure and grinding attacks, Russian forces were visibly exhausted. Defensive lines that had held for weeks began to crack. Eventually, Moscow's units could no longer maintain their positions and were forced into withdrawal. We'll break down every detail of this rare success. But first, consider the statement delivered by Vladislav Voloshin, spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Defense Forces. According to Voloshin, Ukrainian troops repelled Russian attempts to advance toward the Dnipro region by launching coordinated counterattacks and offensive actions in the Oleksandrivka sector. The situation there, near the junction of the Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions, had been extremely tense. Yet Ukrainian forces destroyed advancing Russian elements and blocked any breakthrough toward Dnipropetrovsk and the village of Pokrovsky. He made one thing clear: Russian troops were under immense pressure, but they were not standing still. Still, he emphasized that several Russian units had effectively lost their combat capability and could no longer conduct meaningful offensive operations. Ukrainian armored formations injected new energy into the battlefield. What had once been a steady Russian push southward was suddenly halted and reversed. The turning point that prompted President Volodymyr Zelensky to celebrate came directly from the Zaporizhzhia axis. Russian forces were compelled to abandon roughly 10 kilometers of territory, land they had spent 60 days capturing, in just 168 hours. On the surface, that sounds like a simple line drawn backward on a map. But this was not merely a 10-kilometer shift. It triggered the largest organized Russian withdrawal in southern Ukraine and exposed serious fractures in command cohesion. Ukrainian units advanced along river lines in the sector, liberating more than 10 settlements. Each of these villages had served as Russian outposts, forward pressure points used to strain Ukrainian defenses. Once these nodes collapsed, Russian troops had little choice but to fall back toward the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. It resembled a carefully calculated chess match. At the center of this effort stood Ukraine's 225th Separate Assault Regiment. Near Hulyapol, its assault teams cleared Russian defensive lines in 2 villages. In a single day, they neutralized dozens of Russian soldiers. But the most striking engagement unfolded in Starodubivka. Fighters from the 225th penetrated fortified Russian positions and captured a significant number of prisoners. The captured personnel were searched, evacuated, and transported alive. Footage from the aftermath showed Ukrainian forces adhering to the Geneva Conventions, sparing those who surrendered. Coordination was the decisive element. Within the regiment, the Black Swan Strike Group worked in close synchronization with UAV pilots and infantry assault teams. Where Russian electronic warfare coverage was weak, Ukrainian drones conducted preliminary strikes, opening safe corridors for advancing troops. This approach allowed assault groups to reach enemy positions with minimal losses. Yet even this was not enough on its own to force such a dramatic retreat. Ukraine continued pressing the advantage. The 475th Independent Assault Regiment launched a rapid, weather-sensitive attack based on precise intelligence. This unit became particularly known for its extensive use of fiber optic-controlled UAVs, drones immune to traditional electronic jamming. That technological edge allowed them to strike deep into trench systems 4 to 5 kilometers behind the front. The operation began by targeting Russian supply convoys moving toward Zaporizhzhia. Airstrikes destroyed trucks carrying ammunition and reinforcements before they reached forward units. Then came the ground phase. Russian troops entrenched in wooded defensive positions were flushed out by the 475th Infantry teams. Key staging areas intended for a future Russian push toward Zaporizhzhia were retaken, reinforcing the defensive line around Orikhiv. This setback disrupted what Russian command had reportedly envisioned as the foundation for a broader summer 2026 offensive. Simultaneously, the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment cleared Russian forces from another contested village on February 11, 2026. Supported by UAV reconnaissance, infantry units conducted urban combat operations against Russian soldiers occupying residential buildings. Their expertise in close-quarters battle proved decisive. Airborne units reinforced the momentum. The 82nd and 95th Air Assault Brigades were redeployed from the Pokrovsk sector and committed to operations east of Zaporizhzhia. Both belong to Ukraine's 7th Air Assault Corps. The 82nd Brigade advanced along key defensive lines, while the 95th supported operations near river crossings. Their light armored vehicles and rapid maneuver capability were ideal for exploiting openings in Russian defenses. Their presence deepened operational pressure and complicated Moscow's ability to stabilize the front. Together, these moves pushed Russian forces approximately 10 kilometers back toward the eastern side of the Dnipro. But the fighting was not limited to traditional infantry and armored warfare. Across the open Zaporizhzhia steppe, Russian troops attempted small-scale assaults and casualty evacuations using light, fast-moving ATVs. These mobile tactics were praised in 2024 by Russia's defense leadership as flexible and effective. Yet they ran into a lethal countermeasure. A Ukrainian drone unit known as Iron Falcon developed precision hunting tactics against these targets. Using modified FPV drones, high-speed, maneuverable systems controlled through live video feeds, they struck the vehicles before they could penetrate Ukrainian lines. The result, infiltration attempts dropped sharply. Ukraine did not stop there. Deep behind Russian lines, special operations intensified. The Requiem group of Ukraine's ballista special forces focused on severing supply chains. Reconnaissance drones tracked ammunition and fuel convoys. FPV drones then attacked both the lead and rear vehicles, trapping the convoy in place. Swarm tactics ensured either total destruction or capture. Fuel tanker strikes, in particular, severely reduced the mobility of Russian mechanized units. While Ukrainian forces built momentum across multiple layers, frontline assaults, airborne redeployments, drone warfare, and deep supply disruption, the Russian situation deteriorated rapidly. And this is where the story becomes even more critical. According to visually confirmed data gathered by open-source intelligence analysts, Russia's equipment losses in this relatively narrow sector are staggering. In just 1 week, Moscow lost between 12 and 15 T-80BV and T-72B3 main battle tanks, assets valued at roughly $30 to $40 million. Add to that more than 20 armored combat vehicles worth an estimated 15 to 20 million, along with specialized electronic warfare systems that require months to manufacture and cannot be easily replaced. Altogether, in an area spanning barely 10 kilometers, Russia effectively wrote off $60 to $70 million worth of modern military hardware in a single week. And yet, in the shadow of these heavy losses, Russian channels attempted to broadcast a triumphant narrative. Almost tragically, they claimed a symbolic victory. According to pro-Russian sources, their troops had entered the village of Trunuvate and raised the Russian flag. But the reality told a different story. The location where the flag was reportedly planted lay in the so-called gray zone outside the settlement, an uninhabited patch of land. At that very moment, Ukrainian forces were advancing far beyond that point, breaking through Russian defensive layers. The flag stunt was less a battlefield success and more a morale-boosting spectacle designed for screens back home. Moscow appeared to be trying to cover real territorial losses with symbolic imagery. But propaganda cannot alter geography. The 10 kilometers regained by Ukraine placed the city of Polohy, one of Russia's most critical logistical hubs in the region, within effective range of Ukrainian 155mm artillery systems. Ukrainian forces do not need to storm Polohy, they only need to see it and reach it. Just a week ago, Russian trains could unload ammunition at the Polohy station and distribute supplies directly to frontline units. Now that station sits inside a potential strike zone. As a result, Russia may be forced to offload ammunition 40 to 50 kilometers behind the front, complicating resupply operations. And, as recent footage has demonstrated, Russian military trucks face constant danger. Ukrainian drones monitor movement around the clock. When convoys assemble, they are frequently targeted in coordinated swarm attacks. The breach along the Huliaipol-Polohy axis has sent alarm signals as far as Crimea. To understand why Russia has begun urgently shifting air defense assets northward from Crimea, one only needs to consider those critical 9.5 kilometers. Part of the Kremlin's difficulty on the southern front stems from mismanagement. Specifically, the failure to deploy experienced units at the right moment and in the right locations. Russian forces in Zaporizhzhia struggled not only tactically, but also logistically. The 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, a key component of Russia's southern military district, was unable to hold defensive positions against deep Ukrainian maneuvers. despite having veterans from Mariupol and Kherson operations. Elements of the 58th Combined Arms Army and several motorized regiments were likewise compelled to withdraw under sustained pressure. Initially, the Hryhorivka River had been integrated into Russia's defensive scheme. But once Ukrainian forces crossed it, the river transformed from a defensive asset into a retreat obstacle. As Russian units fell back to the eastern bank, they lost control over bridges and crossing points, narrowing their escape routes. This bottleneck made retreating troops vulnerable to artillery and UAV strikes. Ukraine's successful river crossing demonstrated the coordination behind its broader counteroffensive strategy. Newly established observation points allowed Ukrainian forces to track Russian movements and guide precision artillery fire. At the same time, the effective range from which Russian artillery could strike the city of Zaporizhzhia and surrounding civilian settlements was significantly reduced. This had direct implications for civilian safety and critical infrastructure protection. It also improved conditions around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Reduced frontline proximity decreases the likelihood of military incidents near the facility, an important factor for regional stability. Beyond the battlefield, Ukrainian cyber units contributed to these gains. A Ukrainian team reportedly intercepted identification data and terminal coordinates from Russian soldiers attempting to reactivate Starlink terminals. In total, 2,420 data packets were passed to Ukrainian defense and law enforcement agencies. The response was swift. Affected terminals were placed into brick mode, effectively disabling them. For an army that relies heavily on modern communications, the consequences were severe. When Starlink connections failed, Russian soldiers were reportedly forced to repair cables manually in active combat zones, reverting to far less efficient methods. Meanwhile, Russia's propaganda apparatus sought to reframe the situation. Prominent Kremlin-aligned figures attempted to downplay the setbacks. But rhetoric cannot conceal battlefield realities. Under mounting pressure, Russian units appeared increasingly focused on brute force rather than adaptive strategy. That narrow operational mindset, combined with Ukraine's use of drones, ambush tactics, and technological disruption, has often resulted in heavy Russian losses. Zaporizhzhia was no exception. Ukraine's advance there also indirectly threatens the land corridor linking Crimea to the Russian mainland, a connection vital for sustaining Moscow's military presence on the peninsula. The shift in momentum on the southern front carried psychological consequences as well. Ukrainian morale surged, while Russian confidence appeared shaken. In prolonged conflicts, that psychological imbalance can be as decisive as material losses. Internationally, the operation strengthens Ukraine's credibility among allies. Demonstrated effectiveness on the battlefield reinforces confidence in continued support. However, consolidation is now crucial. Holding recaptured territory matters just as much as taking it. Russian forces may attempt to regroup and counterattack as a last resort. That makes mine-clearing operations and the removal of remaining Russian elements in Zaporizhzhia essential next steps. The side that prepares defensively while maintaining pressure will likely retain the upper hand in the days ahead. For now, the outlook favors Kyiv. Over the course of 1 week, Russia suffered what can only be described as a strategic setback. In Zaporizhzhia, no meaningful gains, but the loss of 2 months' effort, hundreds of personnel, dozens of armored vehicles, and nearly 10 kilometers of operational depth. At a time when Ukraine faced intense pressure in Donbas, it demonstrated its ability to deliver a sharp and agile strike in the south. While Russian attention was fixed elsewhere, Ukrainian forces made calculated moves to stabilize and slightly secure Zaporizhzhia. War is ultimately about balance. This week, the scale tilted toward Kyiv. Ukraine did not merely reclaim territory, it seized the initiative. In early February, momentum appeared to favor Russia. By mid-February, that momentum had shifted. Now Moscow finds itself in a waiting phase, uncertain where the next Ukrainian move will unfold. For an exhausted force dealing with disrupted communications and declining morale, uncertainty can be more dangerous than direct fire. For the moment, the sky above Zaporizhzhia is painted in Ukrainian blue, and that flag continues to fly over the rooftops of the liberated settlements. As always, share your thoughts in the comments below.